I used to think I would. I used to believe I could look someone in the eyes and tell whether they were lying. But the truth is, I didn't see it. None of us did. My name is Alice Wynne, and this is the part one can never take back. The moment that divides my life into a before and an after. It was a Thursday night. Not stormy, not unusual, just ordinary. Dinner on the table. My sister, Marion, humming in the kitchen. And him, Victor Harlow, seated at the head of the table, smiling the way only someone trusted too deeply can. You have to understand, Victor wasn't a stranger. He wasn't a shadow. He was family. He knew what we feared, what we loved, what we prayed no one else would ever find out. And maybe that's why no one noticed when his smile lingered too long, or when his questions about us started sounding less curious and more calculated. That night, Marion poured him a glass of wine. I remember the way his hand brushed hers. Light, practiced, like it had happened before. And then he looked at me, directly, like he was waiting for me to speak, waiting for me to interrupt whatever had already begun. I didn't, and that silence is the last moment I still replay in my head. Because trust doesn't break with a scream. It breaks with a pause. The kind of pause I gave him. And by the time I realized what I had done, it was already too late. Before I can explain what happened that night, you have to understand who I was. Because betrayal doesn't land the same way for everyone. For me, it tore through old wounds I thought I had already stitched closed. I grew up in a house where silence meant survival. My father worked 2 jobs and came home angry from both of them. My mother, she endured more than she ever admitted out loud. And Marion, my older sister, she learned early how to keep the peace by keeping secrets. Me, I learned how to listen. I could read a room before I even crossed the threshold. I could tell who was lying before they opened their mouth. At least that's what I told myself. But looking back, maybe I wasn't listening at all. Maybe I was just desperate for someone to notice me. Not the careful, quiet version of me, but the real me underneath. And that's where Victor comes in. He wasn't just a guest at our table. He was the only person who ever looked me in the eyes and made me feel seen. He remembered the little things. The way I hated the smell of matches, how I kept my notebooks stacked in color order, how I couldn't sleep without the sound of rain on the window. At first, it felt like kindness. Then it felt like protection. And before I knew it, it felt like dependence. So when I tell you I trusted him, you need to hear the truth in that word. Trust wasn't casual. It was everything. I put parts of myself in his hands that I'd never even given to Marion. That's why, when it all began to unravel, it didn't just feel like betrayal. It felt like exposure. Like every hidden part of me had been dragged into the light and used against me. I tell you this because if you think betrayal starts the night it happens, you're wrong. It starts long before, in the moments we confuse attention for care and care for safety. And that's what I didn't see coming. It didn't happen all at once. That's the thing no one tells you about betrayal. It doesn't knock the door down. It creeps through the cracks you never thought to seal. For me, it started small. One evening, I came into the kitchen and found Victor reading one of my journals. He laughed when he saw me watching, said he was only curious about my handwriting. I told myself it was harmless. I told myself it was flattering, even that he wanted to know me better. But later that night, when I went to bed, I couldn't stop wondering how many pages he had read, and whether he was laughing at me in ways I couldn't hear. Then there were the questions. He always asked about Marion, about her habits, her fears, her friends. I thought it was because he cared about her. But sometimes it felt like he was collecting pieces. Like each answer I gave was another brick he was laying in a house only he could enter. The hardest part to admit is that I ignored it. Every sign, every hesitation, every warning in my own gut. Because I didn't want to be wrong about him. Because being wrong meant I'd handed the most fragile parts of myself to someone who only wanted to break them. And yet, even with that weight pressing in, I still smiled at him across the table. Still listened to his stories. Still convinced myself he was the safest place I could stand. It's strange, looking back now, to realize how quiet those moments were. No arguments, no accusations, just silence. And silence has a way of swallowing the truth whole. That night, when Victor's eyes lingered too long on Marion again, I finally felt it. That first sharp crack in the glass. The one that tells you it's only a matter of time before the whole thing shatters. The morning light slipped through the blinds, but it didn't feel like morning. I stood in the kitchen holding a cup of coffee I hadn't touched. It was already cold, but I couldn't bring myself to drink it. My chest felt tight, like the walls were pressing in. The house was too quiet, too still. The clock on the wall kept ticking, and with every tick I thought about what wasn't happening. No call, no text, not even a short message. He wasn't like that. If he was running late, if something came up, he always let me know. That silence felt wrong. I kept going back to the last thing he said to me. His voice had sounded steady enough, but underneath it, there was a pause, like he wanted to add something but decided not to. Now that silence in his words felt sharper, almost like I had missed a warning I wasn't supposed to miss. I started walking the house, opening doors, looking around. Shoes were still by the door. His jacket hanging exactly where he left it. His favorite cap sitting on the counter, the one he never left without. It didn't add up. He hadn't packed. He hadn't stepped out like he was coming back later. It was like he'd just stopped being here. And that's when the fear really sank in. Because people don't just walk away. Not like that. Not without something. Not without a trace. And yet, no matter how many times I looked, there was nothing to find. I sat down on the edge of the couch, but I couldn't stay still. My hands kept fidgeting, picking at the seam of a cushion I didn't even realize I was holding. The quiet in the house didn't feel like quiet anymore. It felt like something was missing, like a hole had opened up and swallowed the air. I tried to tell myself he'd walk in at any second, but the thought didn't hold. Because if that were true, I wouldn't feel this heaviness pressing down on me. My mind kept circling back to little things, things I hadn't thought twice about before. The way he hesitated before leaving the room last night. The way his eyes shifted, like something weighed on him that he didn't want me to see. I brushed it off then. Now it played on a loop. I found myself listening harder than I should have. For footsteps, for the sound of a door, for anything that would break the silence. But nothing came. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the steady tick of the clock, dragging the minutes longer than they were. I rubbed my temples, trying to remember if I'd missed a sign, a look, a word, anything. The harder I tried, the more my memory seemed to fold in on itself, leaving me with fragments that didn't connect. And then the doubt crept in. What if I had overlooked something right in front of me? What if this wasn't sudden at all, but building for longer than I wanted to admit? The thought sank deep, heavier than the rest. Because if that was true, then maybe I hadn't really seen him at all. Not the way I thought I did. The phone rang, sharp against the quiet. For a second, I just stared at it. I didn't want to answer. I didn't want to explain something I couldn't explain to myself. But when I saw her name on the screen, I picked up. "Hey," she said, her voice tighter than usual. "Is he there?" My stomach sank. "No, I thought maybe he was with you." The pause on the other end lasted too long. "He was supposed to meet me this morning. He never showed." I gripped the phone tighter, trying to keep my voice steady. "Maybe he got held up. Maybe." She cut me off. "That's not him. You know it's not." Her words landed heavy, like she'd been holding them in all night. I didn't know what to say because she was right. This wasn't him. He didn't just disappear from people he loved. "He sounded different yesterday," she added, her voice dropping lower, like she wasn't sure if she should even say it. "When we talked, I could hear something in him, like he wanted to tell me something but didn't." Her words hit me like a mirror of my own thoughts, the same unease I'd felt but hadn't spoken out loud. Silence stretched between us, filled only by our breathing. Two people who loved him, realizing at the same time that something wasn't just wrong, it was already slipping too far. When my sister came over that evening, neither of us said much at first. We just sat in the living room, the weight of everything between us. The house felt different with her there, but the silence was still heavy. After a while, she stood up and started pacing, like she couldn't sit still anymore. "We need to look," she said. We went room to room, opening drawers, checking closets, retracing the same steps I had gone over again and again. I kept thinking it would end the same way, nothing. But then she stopped at the desk in the corner. "Did you see this?" I walked over and she pointed at the drawer. It wasn't locked, but it stuck a little like it hadn't been opened in years. She pulled it out and inside was a small notebook. Plain, worn, no name on the cover. I picked it up, and for a second, I thought it was just old receipts, scraps of paper. But as I flipped through, the handwriting stopped me cold. His handwriting. My chest tightened, my hand frozen on the page. His sister leaned in, reading it too, her face draining of color. The air in the room shifted, colder, stiller. And in that moment, I realized Victor hadn't walked out of this house. He left like a ghost. Subscribe to the Veil of Secret for more stories that stay with you long after they end.